Hi, I'm Harut Markarian, and this is Mobility and Inclusion, the show where we share the powerful stories of people with disabilities and daring entrepreneurs making waves in our world. From technological innovations to best practices in business, we'll learn what it really means to live in an inclusive and universally designed environment. Welcome to a new episode of Mobility and Inclusion. Joining me today is Ronsley, an entrepreneur, speaker, and author. He gave an exceptional TEDx talk that I encourage everyone to see. He is the executive producer of the Psychology of Entrepreneurship and the host of Should I Start a Podcast? Here to tell us all why we should all start a podcast today, Ronsley. Welcome to the show, brother.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. I feel like I've been doing the convincing for way too long. And I'm now in a position where I'm like, if you know that a podcast is going to benefit your business and you already got the reps on the board, I'm going to show you how to get more listeners, more revenue, more credibility. I think having the idea of convincing someone that a podcast is a good idea has changed quite a lot because a lot of people know what a podcast is these days. But I'm excited to get into it, man. You just lead me and let's do this.
Awesome. Now, I know I didn't do justice to you by that introduction, but I'm sure we'll cover your exceptional achievements throughout this podcast.
Sure. I mean, I feel like everyone has incredible achievements. It's just about figuring out when it is meant to be said at what point, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can't agree with you more. I mean, for me, I always think about, instead of me listing his achievements, why don't we cover that as part of our conversational journey throughout this podcast, right?
100%.
All right. So let's, let's start by, how I know you. And, we met at an event, right, for an hour or two, right? And I felt like there was a constant connection there. We kind of vibed, right? And, I came to find out that you're this huge podcast guy, right? I knew nothing about you before then. So how did podcasting impact your life?
Oh, wow.
Is that a loaded question?
Everything I have around me, every single thing I have around me is because I started a podcast over 10 years ago, probably now. Definitely more than a decade ago. Well, not necessarily everything. I mean, my wife and my family, probably not. But other than that, all other relationships, all other opportunities has come as a result of the podcast. And to give you context, I've done over 1,500 interviews. So I've interviewed a lot of people and I've had these conversations with a lot of people. As a result, there's always a bunch of people that you vibe with, like to your point, and you get thought of a lot, which is kind of cool. Like people think about you, which is kind of amazing. And everything around me is because of a podcast. The business, the confidence. I can't believe that I make my money from my voice, because even though I spoke English my whole life, I didn't speak with this accent 21 years ago when I came to Australia. So to have that turn on me, literally, is kind of a blessing. So I am a huge fan, very biased about the platform because I've seen the results. I've been part of a lot of businesses and really cool brands that have made insane changes as a result of our podcast.
So let's go to the businesses and the brands that you've been a part of that I'm sure if you name a few, everybody will know. Just to give the audience some idea of the caliber of businesses we're talking about here.
Yeah, I mean, they're all great businesses. I think I'm pretty lucky with the fact that all our clients have been very unique in what they do. We have actors and politicians and songwriters and athletes. And each one of them are different. They're all doing it for business. They all have a podcast for a reason. There's always a return on the investment that they're making to have the podcast. So everyone from Fortune 500 companies, to companies on stock exchanges, to singular brands that, one person makes up the value of the whole brand. I am right now in conversation with 2 places to create the first podcast for a place. and to return on the tourism economy, which is kind of insane and cool. So I have done a few different versions of a podcast for different brands and different people and different companies. And they're all different, they're all cool, and they're all unique in every different way.
That's so amazing. And like, as you're talking, I'm thinking about, wow, I kind of see myself doing the same thing, right? Within my area of expertise, of course. But talk a little bit more about how a podcast can, complement your business and take it to a new level.
Oh, yeah, 100%. I think what we are missing in today's world more than ever is conversations and relationships in business. And I mean, you were actually part of one of this, that I made an introduction to a person who's actually really, connected in your world. But I mean, it's not like he's my best friend, to be honest. He's not like, we literally met like how I met you, but there's this vibe. And as a result, I can make these connections that no one can make. And if I realized that earlier, I can only imagine what kind of impact that could have had. So I take that very seriously. And so when I think about a podcast, every conversion in any business always happens in a conversation. Whether you're getting a new team member on board, a new client, a new partner, a new sponsor, someone to support your business, someone to believe in what you're doing, all those conversions, they always happen in a conversation. So the simplest way to think about a podcast is, what if you recorded those conversations and published a version of those, edit it down, make it consumable for someone to listen to that. So then they're part of your world and they're listening to your voice way before they even know that they need to be a client of yours or support you in some way. So that, as at its basic level, is how I see a podcast. Most people think of a podcast as a content tool or a marketing tool. I believe that the podcast is the best business development tool that exists, primarily because it allows you to develop your business with every conversation, if you're smart enough to actually have the conversation and the podcast set up in a way that it develops your business, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely it does. And so I'm going to bring this back to what I'm doing today, right? So I have a startup, right? My network isn't big. And I'm sure, and the reason I'm saying this is because I believe that a lot of people out there would relate with what I'm going to tell you. They either have a business, right, without the following, or their business is in a transitional area where now, after the pandemic, a lot of things change in the how to do business around the world, really, right? So in my case, I have a technology startup, right? I come from a corporate setting, so my network in this side, in the entrepreneurial side, is abysmal, to say the least. I have no experience in doing a podcast. I have zero patience in editing what I'm, the videos that after it. So how can someone like me, who's starting a business, let's say, use a podcast to find an investor or find a customer or talk to its clients?
Yeah, great question. The basics of that question start with three main elements. The first element is your truth. Like it has to start with why you. And we had a little version of that when we met in person. And I believe that's going to be the framework and the foundation for what you're going to build going forward. I have no doubt about that conversation being impactful and that realization that you've had in that moment. So it always starts from that. How do you speak your truth? And then who will listen to that truth? Never waste your energy on speaking to someone that's not going to listen to you. Mm-hmm. And that is key. And a lot of us start to think about, when we put our voices out there, the people who are going to not listen or have a critique on what we're saying. And it's the exact opposite. You got to first find your truth and find who cares about the way you say it or what you're saying. And that is the basis for what I'm going to say next, because if you don't have that, the next part becomes hard. But if you have that, the next part becomes easy, which is who has my people but doesn't do what I do. Mm-hmm. Now, it's important to first start with your truth, because otherwise it's very skewed in who you'd reach out to. It's also very skewed in who your listeners are, because our tendencies usually is our imagination is only as good as our experience. So if our experience is limited in a certain way, then our imagination of what is possible is also limited. It's very simple. If I want to break that down for the listeners, if I asked you to imagine a deserted island, you can imagine that even though you've never been to a deserted island, but you can imagine that. But if I ask you to imagine the 12th moon of Jupiter, that's hard for you to imagine because of your experience. You don't have the experience of being to outer space, and no one's covered that in documentaries or whatever. So that's the difference and that happens a lot in business. So when you're starting off, you might have great technical expertise in your area, but understanding the other elements of business become foreign to you. So you got to learn those elements, which is marketing and accounting and business development and relationships. So the way I see it is, if you know what your truth is and you know who your audience is, and then you know who has your audience, then you create a podcast for that audience by interviewing the people that have your audience. So you're co-creating for this audience who care about your truth. So you're grounding it all on your truth, but you have the co-creators of the people who have your audience. And that makes you have a minimum of 52 business development conversations a year, which, if one of them return, is going to be a big cash cow for your revenue, but it just happens to create content. It just happens to create marketing. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And so, I mean, this is a great, bridge to my next question, which is the importance of communicating the right message in the most influential way, right? It comes back down to, speaking your truth. And in my experience, English being my fourth language, I mean, that's a lame excuse, I feel like. But usually growing up, I was very technical, right? Yeah. I always was like the scientific person and the numbers person and this and that, which in many ways today, maybe regret is a strong word, but I do regret. I wish I paid more attention in my communication and the vocabulary that I'm using, right? Because going through the entrepreneurial journey right now that I'm on, I came to realize that I lack that, influential speaking capabilities, which proved to be very important.
Let me put that in context for you. What do you think is harder to acquire, technical skills or communication skills?
Harder? In my opinion, I don't think that any one is harder than the other. It's just my willingness to accept it.
Fair enough. So from a standing start, for someone who doesn't know the difference, technical skills are more difficult to acquire, primarily because they are built on academic progression.
Yes.
So you need to learn some basics of algebra, geometry, physics, chemistry, maths to be able to go into computer science. And then from computer science, being able to develop those to the next level, and then doing data structures and so on. All that requires a progression. Absolutely. So as opposed to communication, where practice becomes the most important thing, so that's like learning any language, right? So if the more you practice the language, the more competent you become. And what happens in communication is we find it embarrassing to practice because we want it to be perfect. And that is what stunts our growth in communication, not the inability to learn. Yeah. So you have the advantage, like myself, of having technical skills that you necessarily couldn't. Like, you might have the great communication skills, but would you at this age learn technical skills from scratch?
It's much harder, for sure. It's my I don't know. Yeah, I think I'm tapped out. Yeah.
I understand, but I think that you're in a really good position. Then, I mean, the fact that I just want you not to regret the fact that you have these technical skills, because they are the basis for everything. Now, anyone can talk great, but do they know what they're talking about? Yeah. Most people are talking bullshit. Most people are just absolutely talking. They have no idea of what they're referring to when they're talking. They've heard someone else say it and they're repeating it. This is very different to what you're doing.
Absolutely. And, that's, you bring up very good points. And I'm someone who, growing up, you want to be part of the conversation, right? And you don't really necessarily have a platform. Maybe you don't even have a business. But if you're in crowds and you want to be part of the conversation, you pick up things from here and there, and then you just, blur them out, right? And
Sure.
and God knows how that comes out from this initial story to what you put out, right?
100%, especially if you're not part of the culture, right? Is you're doing it for the first time,
Absolutely.
you want to fit in. I mean, I did that, and now when I look back, I realize that not many people like yourself, like, I mean, you're one of the few as well, like me, who've left their whole culture and had learned a new culture from scratch with all the new relationships. And like you, I did not give it any credit until very recently. And I realized how much value that is, because when I go back to where I came from, the relationships that are there exist for generations. Like my grandfather and someone else, the director of tourism who I'm in conversation with, his father know each other, which is like insane, right?
Yeah.
And I'm here kind of disregarding that I came to this country 21 years ago from scratch and built everything, forgotten that whole thing, until someone like my wife comes along and says, do you realize that we've been watching Fresh Off the Boat and you're that guy that is sort of gone to the other country? I'm like, I've watched the whole program twice, 5 seasons, and never once realized that I was the person that left and came to another country. That is how much we forget the pain we've been through, or the growth spurt we've been through. So it's normal, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, but on the other side of the equation is that if you're not growing, then what are you doing, right? Let's say you made that commitment to move, or to start the business, or to start the podcast, right? It doesn't end there. You have to constantly teach yourself how to be better at this new thing you adopted, right? Yeah. So if growth is not there, then you're just staying stagnant. And in my book, that doesn't exist, because time is moving forward. So there's no such thing as staying stagnant. You're actually moving backwards, right?
Yeah. And it depends on each one's perspective, because there are still people who are scared of growth, because what if they can't grow with the moment? Mm-hmm. And that's why we shrink away from certain situations and we play small. And being an athlete really helps you put that in perspective, because every time you go onto the court or wherever you play, you're in this competitive nature where you're actually fighting against yourself. And the quicker you can not fight against yourself, the quicker you can be in the moment and flow. So I love talking about business, because it's this personal development that happens as a result that I don't think any other form can give you. Maybe an athlete, can put yourself in that position.
Yeah.
But I believe they're all entrepreneurs. An athlete has to find a way to survive.
Absolutely.
And so the songwriter.
It's funny you mentioned that. Have I told you that I was an athlete?
No, please tell me. Yeah.
So I played professional basketball in Lebanon, right? But throughout my entire childhood and then right before I moved here to the United States, I played sports competitively, right?
Yeah.
And you're 100% right. Ultimately, the only person you're fighting against is yourself, right? Because you're fighting against your mind being an athlete. Now, when I came here, I played college 1 year, and college basketball, it wasn't the same, right? At that point, it was like over for me. But, being that stubborn athlete, yes. I didn't want to give that up. I didn't want to admit that, and for the longest time, I come back to the earlier, like the speaking your truth, the purpose. I felt like my truth was gone when basketball was out of my life, because for so long, that was a huge passion of mine.
Yeah.
And so when I got into robotics and started working with people, when I had the first idea of potentially starting a company, I felt like there was a new purpose in my life, right?
Sure.
And now, like you, I very much enjoy talking about business development, how I'm going to grow the company, who am I going to partner with to grow the company, right? Who are going to be my co-founders, my partners in the company to grow this. So it's all very exciting for me, as opposed to just, I had also 15 in my previous 15 years. I was in the corporate world as an aerospace engineer, right? And that's very slow. That is very slow. Like, I loved what I do. I loved it. But the politics, the pace, it was too slow for me. I didn't want that. And that's why I'm working today on that transition.
Sure.
And to your point earlier, it's bringing me so much joy to know, and I don't know if I'm going to be successful, right? But just to have that, just to know that there's a possibility of being great at something you love, it's amazing.
I love that you brought up being an athlete, because about a year and a bit ago, my wife said to me, Ronsley, I love badminton. I think we should just get fit again. So let's go play badminton. So I said to her, do you know, like, I played pre-national, like I went to the national camp, almost played for India. And she didn't really land with her, like, what that really meant until we got on the court. And on the court, we realized for the first, so she's never seen me play badminton, and I've never played after being married. But we realized a lot of things about myself as soon as I stepped onto the court. I realized a lot of my discipline, a lot of the way I compete, and a lot of the way I treat a lot of things is because of this training. And I used to play basketball as well, but I played table tennis and badminton competitively. So as a result, now I play them competitively for Brisbane, because this is only a year ago, getting back into that. And it gives me way too much joy to realize that, I used to play this when I was a kid, and now I'm just like a kid with money. It's a bit weird. And I love that I can go and practice being an athlete on the court. So I do suggest going back to basketball, even if it is just for the sake of doing it, because that helps massively, especially because you're an athlete and we are trained to not give up. Back against the wall, find 100%. A new level, become a new person.
100%. I cannot agree with you more. The days so I'm not playing as much basketball today, but I try to work out at least 3 times a week. Building a company right now, and having a full-time job and working on that transition, things that can be very, it feels like you have no time, but ultimately it's like your decisions, right? Your decisions what drive your schedule. But to your point, if I'm not working out, I'm not playing soccer, I'm miserable. My body is miserable. It's not me. Don't talk to me today. That kind of stuff, and things that I have to do for my business doesn't go well because I'm not in a good mood, and I'm not good, right? That's 100%. Very important. I'm going to talk about, so how did you, let's shift gears to the TEDx that you did. I've been like 3, 4, 5 years ago, I was wondering when I saw your TEDx, it kind of brought it back, right? It's like, how does someone get on a TEDx stage?
Yeah. Well, what a great question, because I am just blown away by the whole experience, because in 2020, that TEDx got made a TED Talk is now on the TED website. And I almost did not have TEDx on my list of goals or whatever. To tell you the truth, a good friend of mine, she had on her goals list to do a TEDx talk. And every year, at the end of the year in December, usually the 31st, 30th, 31st, around that time, I write a letter to myself 1 year from that day. So I imagine myself a year from the future, and I'm just grateful for the whole year that has gone by, and I write a letter. Now I remembered Amber's thing about being a TEDx thing. So in my letter to myself, I wrote, I'm so grateful for having done a TEDx talk in September of 2017. And
that's awesome.
It just and I forgot about it literally forgot about it. And then my local chapter here, which I had been to the first TEDx UQ when it started way back in 2010, I think. And I've been a fan, obviously, of TEDx. And they reached out saying, would you like to speak? Here is where you submit the submission. And I said, yeah, I mean, let's submit and see what happens. And I submitted this idea of having deep conversations. I found it insane that they accepted me, because it's a very rigorous process. That you have to go and have an interview and tell them what you're going to talk about. And then they train you to talk about it properly, so you're not just giving
jibber jabbering.
Yeah. And I remember being extremely nervous. Like, I have no problems entertaining any amount of crowds. Like, you tell me on the spot, Ronsley, you have an hour, you have half an hour, you have 20 minutes to entertain these people, like, just go on stage, no problem. But when I got accepted, I had 6.5 weeks, I remember, to the final thing. And I was nervous for those 6 weeks. That was just crazy. And a friend of mine 3 days before asked me how I was doing. And I said, I'm so nervous. And I started to tell her why I was nervous. And she's like, this whole thing is not about you, right? And that really hit me. And I was making it all about me and how I was going to look good on this stage. And that last 3 days just shifted my whole energy, my persona, my everything. And that TEDx delivery was probably one of my best, in the sense that I knew that I wanted 3 things to happen. And I did that in less than 12 minutes. I wanted them to laugh, and you can hear them laughing in the thing. I wanted to make them cry, and the whole front rows were crying, and I wanted to make them think. And to be able to do that in 11 and a half minutes, I feel like all my school, being in the debate team, being in elocution, being going through my master's degrees, writing a thesis, all those little things that I negated helped me deliver 11 and a half minutes that people watch these days, which is insane. So for me, and again, I didn't know that it got made a TED Talk until my local chapter in Goa, where I'm from, sent me a message saying, we would love to have a TED speaker speak at the Goa chapter. And I said, I'm just a TEDx speaker, and they sent me the link, like, no, you're a TED speaker. This is on the TED Speak. And I was like, oh my God, that is crazy. So I don't know what the process is in terms of how that all happens, but that is just, for me, a collection of events that just happened to conspire in my favor.
Yeah. And well, I mean, you're making it sound like it was by chance, but there's this idea that you can impact your subconscious mind at some points during the day, like once before you're sleeping and once right after you wake up, especially when you have things written down. So I feel like that's exactly what happened to you,
But I mean, it's still by chance. You know why? Because I think a lot of us are presented with these opportunities often, but we don't take it in different ways. And I think this timing is important. The people around you is important.
Absolutely.
A lot of other things that I feel is a miracle every time I think about it. Like, a lot of things have had to happen for this to become a thing, which it is now, right? So I think it's by chance. I just happen to believe that I took the chance, which is the difference.
Absolutely. There's something to be said about you being presented with the chance and then you taking the chance, right? So you can always be presented by some chance, but if you don't take it, then it's on you at that point.
I'll give you a great example of this because I think it's relevant, because it just happened a week and a half ago. I just traveled to the States and I went for an event in Miami. And at that event, this happens all the time, like it happened to you in person, right? It happens all the time where someone says, I want to do this for my podcast and my business, and I will say something and they'll break down and they'll have this great moment or they'll have this breakthrough. And I don't really think of it as much. And it happened for 2 days in a row at this event. And it became about, Ronsley's this podcast guy, let's go talk to him. Let's make time. And everyone was talking to me. It was like, it became about me, which I don't really like much because I'm introverted.
Yeah.
However, on the last day at lunch, I finished lunch and a friend of mine, his name is John Logar, because I want to give him credit, he came up to me and was upset, was physically upset, pulled me aside and he said, Ronsley, what the fuck are you doing? And I was taken aback because, we're friends. We're friends with his wife and Rochelle, and they've been to our house. So I was like, what do you mean, John? And I was, my hair at the back of my neck stood up, like suddenly really paying attention to what the fuck is going on. And he said, all these people are asking you about a podcast. They're having these breakthrough moments, but have you put an offer in front of them? And what the fuck are you doing? Like, it's time to stop fucking around and it's time to start working. And it shook me because he was right. I love getting the high of the transformation. Yeah. Like, I love seeing people transform, but they don't have to buy from me, so I won't say anything. And it hit me. So I went to my room. And for the next 2 hours, I built this whole thing. And it comes easy to me now because of the tech background and everything. It literally had everything done in 2 hours with testimonials of people from, everything. And at dinner, I said, John, I'd love for you to have a look at this because I've just finished it. He's like, wait, you did this in 2 hours? I'm like a wind-up monkey. You just point me in the right direction, right? And since then, I have banked, like the money is in the bank, $41,000. Like it is in the, like not even from the people that have not, like I have to, get back to, who are like, yes, I'm in, let's talk about this. None of that. Like the people that have already like paid. And that's 5 days. And that is because of one conversation that I could have taken personally, but decided that someone went outside their comfort zone to give me that advice. And if a previous version of Ronsley would have not taken it.
Well, I mean, I feel like I'm the previous version of Ronsley right now. But I mean, I say that, take that with a grain of salt, right? The thing is, I'm an aerospace engineer. I started a robotics company, and the only reason I started a podcast is because when I established my robotics company, I didn't know what product to go to market with. So, and there was the pandemic. I couldn't go talk to people anymore and to know and see and learn what their needs are. So I'm like, okay, next best thing is a podcast, right? So I get people on my podcast. They tell me they're aware of what they need. That's the only reason. And look at me now. Like you look great. I'm like looking at my screen. I'm like, needs a lot of improvements needs to happen here. But
but there's a difference. I mean, you're comparing my year 11 to your year 1 or 2, right? And
absolutely, yeah.
And I'm still learning to be an interviewer. I'm still learning to be a better podcaster, and I don't think that goes away because it's not natural. It's a process, and starting it is like the main thing because most people want to be perfect from day one, and that's not possible.
Yeah. For me, there was that for sure. I was very self-aware of how my accent was, how efficient, fluent I was speaking, and I was always looking on the camera. I'm like, you need other equipment, you need a nice background, like you need to take off this freaking light from under your head. It's like glowing, 5 o'clock shadow, right? So it's a lot of things, right? So that has been in my mind, but ultimately I didn't care because I never thought that the podcast would go anywhere with me because that wasn't my intention, right? My intention was just to find a product that I can go to market with that impacts the lives of many people. But, the more I did it, I started gaining friends, right? I have friends now from my podcast that they assist me in developing the product.
Yeah.
right? So that was amazing. And now, when people, and again, I'm not as consistent as I should be, but when people hear that I still have my podcast, they want to be on it. I'm like, hey,
Yeah.
sure, I'll bring you on it. Let's have a fun conversation.
And let me give you another piece of advice after doing this for over a decade. A lot of people who have done really well with their podcasts, I ask them this question all the time because they tell me, "Oh, this podcast is doing really well for me." I'm like, "What happened? Like, what happened that resulted?" And they always have the same answer. I don't know. Like, just one day it just went crazy. And if I dig deeper, it's always the same reason. It's the day they take their podcast seriously that the world starts to take their podcast seriously and the universe starts to comply. And that is the biggest difference. And usually what happens is we don't want to make a big ruckus about our voice. We don't want to tell people, hey, come listen, because what if people say, I don't want to listen? That's amazing. That's amazing. Like, that's better that you know who is not your people, because the ones that are your people will find you. And it's important to find those people. Absolutely. Like, I have this right in front of me and it has been here for ages. And I'm going to read it out. I use my voice because a lot of my ancestors didn't get a chance to use theirs. That's my why.
But that I forgot to mention this. You ended your TED talk by saying, giving someone else a voice that doesn't have one. Right. So that was very memorable for me, because in many ways, I feel like I'm doing something similar with my business in terms of like addressing the community of people with disabilities. Right. Yes, there has been technologies, or assistive technology has been around for a long time, but how much have they been able to really address and give this community what they needed? It wasn't much. The answer wasn't much, and they are always left behind. And I didn't know this, right? I figured this out by the podcast, by talking to people, by going around asking people, right? So in many ways, I feel like I'm giving voice or assistance or some type of partnership where it's impacting the quality of their lives.
100%. And a lot of us don't realize that. And a lot of us take a while to get to the point where you make the connection between what you're doing in the podcast, the conversations you're having, because I can tell you that for what you're trying to achieve you said it very differently when we met, and I'm hoping that you say it very differently now, because if you start basing that on your truth, which is so powerful, then the way people come to your mission is entirely different. They want to be part of it, and I want to be part of it. Like I mean, I want to be, because I know your truth. I think about it, and I think about you every time it comes up, which is very powerful, as opposed to someone saying, "Oh, I'm a robotics guy that is dealing with assisted technologies," and that doesn't land anywhere for me. Why would I keep you in mind as opposed to what you're trying to do?
Absolutely. And you're right. It doesn't land anywhere to me either. I don't go and say to people that I'm a roboticist, because, if you're not Elon Musk these days, just shut up, right? Just shut up. So, at least in my opinion, right? So, and for me, it was more like, okay, there's a bigger purpose here than just being a roboticist. Yes, I love doing robotics, right? Am I really good at it? Probably not. But do I know my way around it? Yes, I do. But why do I do it? Because I experienced, when I was going through I don't know if I told you this, but when I was going through my master's program, I worked with a severely paralyzed individual, and the technology we used was brain-computer interface, which allowed the individual to propel his wheelchair through his thoughts. Yeah. Right? That was the first time I ever said to myself that one day I'll start a company, doing robotics and impacting people's lives, in this way. And that was a pivotal moment. That was the first pivotal moment for me. And the second pivotal moment, what I communicated to you back then, my grandparents' situation, right?
Yeah. So that happened afterwards.
Afterwards, yeah, that was like maybe 4 or 5 years after.
Got it.
So when my grandparents had stroke, they're, they no longer had any mobility. And not only they had physical challenges, but their emotional well-being went to shit. It was horrible. And your emotional well-being has more consequences on your body than whatever else you're feeling. If you're emotionally not good, your body is not going to heal, right? Yeah. And that took a toll on them, on the family members, on the caregivers, right? So that was the second pivotal moment in my life. That's when I said, this is when I start my company.
Yeah.
I don't know what I'm going to do.
How impactful? I mean, when you think about what you're able to do, like how you can bring all your gifts together into serving a bunch of people who not many people think of.
Yeah.
Not many people think of them. And that most of us will only start to think of them if it happens to someone we care about. Absolutely. So, kudos to you. I love your mission and why you're doing it. And I'm always here to support you because I think it's important.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. So how can we support you? What other things you have coming up that people need to know about?
It's simple. I think every business needs to have a podcast. That's it. It's very, very simple. I have never not seen it work for a business. You are proof, which I want to get you on the show for, so we can document your case study. I don't think people realize the power of the podcast. I don't think people realize the power of the conversation. And now more than ever, there's this loneliness aspect that everyone is dealing with. And the podcast lets you tap into other people's energy and not feel alone because you're having these conversations and having these interviews. And I'm really, really, I'm really bought into the idea that it needs to be an interview type show, primarily because if you bake the idea of business development into your conversations, which every business owner avoids or doesn't have time for because they're growing their company and have other things to deal with, team, culture, operations, accounting, marketing, business development gets thrown out to the back burner. So if you bake that into your podcast, it's like a no-brainer return, not only on investment, on scale, on relationships, on content, on reach, on distribution. It's like such a huge return.
Yeah.
So it's simple. If you're a business owner and you want a podcast or have a podcast and want to grow it, listen to my podcast. Shouldistartapodcast.com is where you go to find that. And just
I'll include all your information when I post this. Of course, every link that you have on your website will be under that podcast as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. And just to tell the audience like how influential Ronsley is, he literally built a global network of professional podcasters, right? So he was like, you're all over the world. It's not just you. I think you're in Brisbane now, correct?
I'm in Brisbane now, and I live in Brisbane. My house is in Brisbane, but in 2022, I've only been in Brisbane for like maybe 2 months of the whole year.
Hopefully, you're taking your wife with you.
No, maybe if she doesn't. No, I'm joking. Yes, well, not all the time, but she's an ICU nurse, so she's in the hospitals here and works here. But yeah, we're kind of lucky, and we get a chance to hang out with our folks that are in India. So we're gonna be there for the end of the year.
Nice.
And it's just we're really blessed and really grateful for our lives, really.
Awesome. I love a gratitude, right? And I am blessed to have this moment with you, this time with you. Thank you so much for giving me your time, your energy, your wisdom. I truly appreciate it, and I can't wait to do another podcast with you soon.
Amazing. Thank you, Art. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Hi, I'm Harut Markarian, and this is Mobility and Inclusion, the show where we share the powerful stories of people with disabilities and daring entrepreneurs making waves in our world. From technological innovations to best practices in business, we'll learn what it really means to live in an inclusive and universally designed environment.